see you all. Yes, 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 and it's good to record it. You can always go and check if I spoke the truth, if I spoke the truth again. Um, but really good to be with you, and thank you again for welcoming me so warmly there last year. It's etched in my memory. I think behind me you will see the plate and so on that you gave me as a gift last year. So it's really good to be with you. Okay, I've been asked to speak about the sort of the history of the anti-apartheid movement, and I'm going to launch right into it, uh, and and I will let you know which parts I think are the most important to remember. So I'm going to start in 1948 because that is the year when apartheid was implemented in South Africa. Remember, the Second World War was happening in Europe, and the English contingent in South Africa, they were in power in South Africa. It's called the United Party, and they all went to fight the war with the Allied forces. And of course, the sort of Dutch contingent of white South Africa, or what's called the Afrikaner, they stayed at home and organized politically during the war years. And so when the elections happened in 48, the National Party took over from the United Party. And so the National Party became the official government of South Africa and immediately implemented this policy called apartheid. The ANC was the main opposition to racism in South Africa up to that point. That's called the African National Congress, and of course at that time it was led by people like Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and others. But they were young. They were young at the time, and so a year later, in 1949, they started the ANC Youth League, and it was really the Youth League that decided that we cannot simply continue with talks with the apartheid regime. We need to also form an underground movement. And so it was a kind of a radical youth wing that formed within the African National Congress in 1949 and onwards. And it was 6 years later that this particular movement, the African National Congress, and what's called the rest of the Congress movement. Remember, there was the African National Congress, but then there was also the Colored People's Congress. There was the Natal Indian Congress. There was the Congress of Democrats. And so because apartheid was in a sense in four sections, so the population was African or black, white, colored, and Indian, and that was the sort of the quadrant of apartheid population. And so the Congress movement, consisting of the African National Congress, primarily black, the Congress of Democrats, primarily white or socialist communist people, and trade unionists, the Indian Congress, which of course Indian mainly, and the Colored People's Congress, which is mainly what's called colored people in South Africa, and that's a particular feature of the Western Cape here. That Congress movement gathered in 1955 in a place called Kliptown in Soweto, and they adopted what was called the Freedom Charter. Now, someone like myself, as an activist who grew up in a sense in the Congress movement, I learned the Freedom Charter, as a young activist. And the Freedom Charter starts with the words, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, both black and white. and no government can justly claim authority unless it is governed by the will of the people. That is the preamble to the Freedom Charter. And so, and then it has 10 points in the Freedom Charter that explains what it is about. Now, this is 55 in Kliptown, Soweto. And one of the key drivers behind the launch of the Freedom Charter was actually Father Trevor Huddleston. And Trevor Huddleston was an Anglican priest, a monk actually, here in South Africa, and he was the key influence in the young Desmond Tutu's life. Remember, at this time, Tutu was not really an activist at the time, but it was Father Trevor Huddleston who would bring the young Desmond Tutu into consciousness about what was happening in South Africa. Huddleston himself was banned from South Africa, and he could only return after 1990, after the ANC was unbanned. So that's 55 when this happened. And then 5 years later, the Sharpeville massacre happens. And those of you who know what that is, or don't know what it is, it was a protest, and it was mainly by a kind of a splinter group from the African National Congress called the Pan-Africanist Congress, under the leadership of Robert Sobukwe. And they were the ones who decided that this thing called the Dompas, it was a document that every black person had to have on them, that they refused to carry this Dompas, this pass book anymore, and they actually walked to the police station in Sharpeville, and they went to go and burn their pass right there. And the police opened fire, and 87 people, I think the number is 87, yes, were killed. Most of them were shot in the back on that day. And it was really the Sharpeville massacre that gave the impetus globally, certainly, to the anti-apartheid movement. But a month later, the ANC, the PAC, the Communist Party, all these parties were banned. So all the liberation movements were banned in 1960. And it was then that we began to see the emergence of what is really the four mainstreams of the liberation movement. And if you forget everything else, just remember this that I say tonight. And so the four streams, the first one was really the underground stream, and that was the what was called Umkhonto weSizwe, or the spear of the nation, which was the sort of the underground movement of the African National Congress. They were in many ways the least effective, but that was one of the streams. The second stream was those who went into exile, and so you had people, across the globe, South Africans, Black South Africans in particular, but also white South Africans, going across the globe, living in different parts of the world, and then calling on governments wherever they are to implement sanctions against apartheid South Africa, and making apartheid South Africa actually into a pariah state. And I just want to say something about this quickly, and this is that we were not really able to convince the major Western governments on boycott, divestment, and sanctions, because we had the unfortunate unholy trinity of Margaret Thatcher in the UK, Helmut Kohl in Germany, and Ronald Reagan in the USA. And the three would not budge on the question of sanctions and boycotts against the apartheid regime in South Africa. And so we then knew that actually we needed to go to the people, and our leaders went right down to the people, to the churches, to the trade union movements, to civil society organizations, and so on. And it was the pressure from the people ultimately that led to the world taking action against apartheid South Africa. So that's a very important point to make, but that was the second stream. The third stream were, of course, those on Robben Island, the Mandelas and the Sisulus, the Mbekis, and so on. They were all on the island. Even though they were in a sense invisible, there was a global movement that began to spread around releasing them, and of course around one name, and that was about release Nelson Mandela. So even though we knew that there were many other people in prison, there was this iconic figure, Nelson Mandela, that the whole world focused on ultimately, to work towards the freedom of prisoners. And then the final and the most important bit, and I was part of this, of course, was the internal mass democratic movement. This is really our civil rights movement. And I think we were most effective when some of these worked together. So for example, the Arch Tutu, together with others, working together with the exiles, calling on the release of Nelson Mandela. It's when these streams started working together that we began to see a mass movement, a global anti-apartheid movement, mobilizing to end apartheid. And actually, it was Archbishop Trevor Huddleston who ultimately became the leader of the global anti-apartheid movement. Just as a sort of a personal story, I was studying in Oxford in the UK in the late 80s, and I actually called Father Archbishop Trevor Huddleston, and he picked up his phone, and we spoke on the phone, and he came to Oxford for a lecture, and then I was able to meet him there. So I was very privileged that I was able to meet him, and someone who had inspired Archbishop Tutu, now in a way equally inspiring someone like myself and other young activists at the time. So that was what was happening in terms of the anti-apartheid movement. It's almost a kind of a summary, but internally, from the 60s, mid-60s till about the mid-70s, we had what was called the Black Consciousness Movement operating in South Africa, mainly under the leadership of Steve Bantu Biko. Many of you might know Biko. You might have even seen the movie Biko. But that was a very powerful movement, and it was, in a sense, Black activists taking agency and responsibility for the liberation of South Africa. And in some cases, they even separated themselves. Like at universities, there was a movement called NUSAS, the students, and Black students separated themselves from NUSAS and formed the Black Students Associations and so on. And that was a very important and significant movement. And even someone like Tutu and others would work together with the Black Consciousness Movement at the time in the late 60s, well, early 70s more in his case. Tutu ultimately was the one who actually did the sermon at Steve Biko's funeral service in 77. So the year before Biko died, we had what was called the Soweto riots, or the 1976 June 1976 crisis, and it was really around education, but it was actually about young people taking charge of the struggle in South Africa, and young people actually just being impatient and saying, look, we can no longer wait on these older leaders. We will now take to the streets. And of course, young people getting killed as a result of that. And so a few things happened quite quickly. I'll try to be quick about this. A few things happened. First of all, Desmond Tutu became the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches in 1978. Now, this is important because Tutu had been, doing various things. He was then elected as, first of all, as Dean of the Cathedral in Johannesburg, the first Black Dean of the Cathedral in Johannesburg. He then is elected Bishop of Lesotho for a short while in 76, and then 2 years later, he gets called to Johannesburg to become the General Secretary of the Council of Churches. He becomes General Secretary not as Reverend Tutu, or even Very Reverend Tutu, because that's what the Dean is normally called, but he becomes the General Secretary as Bishop Tutu. In other words, he brings the office of the bishop, the gravitas of the office of the bishop. He brings that into the struggle. And Tutu at the time, I mean, the Council of Churches was a huge, I mean, he built it into a huge movement. And he could eventually say to the apartheid regime, he could say to them, look, you only represent 4 million South Africans. I represent 14 million South Africans. That was the Tutu could talk about his leadership, and it was mainly in the context, of course, of the church. The other person that some of you know is Alan Busak, and of course he became he becomes the president of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches in 1982 in Ottawa, Canada. They elect him as the president of the WARC. And the two of them, of course, in many ways become the kind of leaders of the internal mass movement in South Africa, both from a church base, actually. And so in the 80s is when we really see mass protest begin to happen, and almost in a sense fearless mass protest, despite this huge army and police force and so on that the regime has. We as young people at the time, in a sense, we lost all fear of death, and decided to protest non-violently against apartheid at the time. In 1983, a very significant movement is launched called the UDF, the United Democratic Front. Now, this is a mass movement, and it is launched because there was a plan by the apartheid regime to start what is called a tricameral parliament, a three-chamber parliament. What that means is that you had a white chamber, you had a colored chamber, and you had an Indian chamber. And the logic of that was that because Black Africans had their own homelands, Transkei, Ciskei, KwaZulu-Natal, and so on, they could vote for those things over there, which is really not recognized by anyone except by the regime here. But they realized that the Indians and the colored people do not have any kind of vote, and so they attempt to co-opt colored and Indian people into the Parliament of South Africa. But the way they do that, and I'm sorry for this detail, the way they do that, they say a white vote is equal to 4, a colored vote is equal to 2, and an Indian vote is equal to 1, meaning that 2 plus 1 will never be greater than 4. I mean, will never make 4. So even if the two houses of parliament, the Indian and colored house, vote together, they could never defeat the White House of Parliament, because the formula was such that it was 4 versus 3 versus 2 plus 1. So that, and of course we just rejected that. We said no. The UDF was launched to protest that. And so even by 84, when they had an election to this effect, to draw these two groups in, only 4% of colored and Indian people actually went to go and vote for that. But still, so it was completely illegitimate. But still, they went ahead and they had the three-chamber parliament. And basically from that time onwards, it was the end of apartheid. It was the end of the regime, because I was at a meeting in Cape Town where we actually just said, we the people now unban the ANC, and we sort of unfurled the flag of the ANC at this meeting. And so the regime really started losing any kind of control it had over South Africa. Anyway, okay, so the year after 83, after the UDF's launch, Desmond Tutu is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. This is important because now Tutu has this absolute global platform. He's still the General Secretary of the Council of Churches, but a year later he gets elected as the Bishop of Johannesburg, again the first Black Bishop of Johannesburg, and then even a year later, 86, he then gets elected as Archbishop of Cape Town, and that's when he comes down to Cape Town, and in a sense he becomes my bishop here in Cape Town, and we begin to work together much more closely. In 85, when Archbishop Tutu becomes Bishop of Johannesburg, is also the same year when we launched something called the Kairos document in Johannesburg. So that was a Kairos document, was launched, a theological document against apartheid. And of course, someone asked about trade unions. COSATU is also launched in 1995. COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And this was, again, a mass movement. Millions of South Africans joining a legal trade union movement in South Africa. So now what you have is you have the UDF, which is the big mass movement. You have the Congress of South African Trade Unions, and you have the churches in the SACC. I mean, all these forces, in a sense, combining to form the mass democratic movement in South Africa. And so from 85, we had what was called the state of emergency, upon state of emergency in South Africa. And so it was never really normal in the sense of just the constitution and the law and order and so on being upheld. The only way the regime could continue to govern South Africa is under what's called the state of emergency, or some emergency regulations that they had. But we now know, and we didn't know then, but we now know that there were secret negotiations happening between the regime and the African National Congress, and all kinds of other secret negotiations happening, which resulted in the 1990 unbanning of the African National Congress and all the other liberation movements, as well as the release of Nelson Mandela. Now, just to, you remember, I talked about the Second World War and whatever gave effect to towards the launch of apartheid or the regime in 48. Again, in 1990, it's a global thing that happens that allows for apartheid to be ended in South Africa, and it's really the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of communism, and so on, that now completely takes the carpet out from under the regime here. They cannot now say we are fighting communism, because that was the big bogeyman at the time. They now have nothing to hide behind, and so 1990 is then when we have the end of apartheid. Another 4 years of negotiations would come after that, and by 1994, in fact, after the death of Chris Hani. Now, Chris Hani was the second most popular liberation leader. He was killed in 1993, and Nelson Mandela said he would only return to negotiations with the Nationalist Party if a date is set for the elections. And so a date gets set for 27 April 1994. So next year, we will have the 30th anniversary of our democracy, and we will again go to the polls next year. So when you arrive in South Africa, there's a lot of campaigning going on already, and you will feel that in the air in a way, because all these different political parties will be campaigning so that people should vote for them next year, whenever that will be. It could be in May, June, July. It could be somewhere there, but the campaigning has, in a sense, already begun. So let me stop with all of that. Just two more things to say, and that is, the first is that what are the redeeming features of South Africa today? And there's at least three things I would mention. First of all is that some people would say that we have the world's best constitution. Even RBG was someone who said that, that South Africa's constitution is really one of the world's, if not the world's best, it is the world's best. If not one of the world's best, it is the world's best constitution. The second redeeming feature, I think, is the fact that we have a completely free media. South Africa is often described as a noisy democracy, and it's true. It's a very noisy democracy, but that's because everyone can say whatever they wish, and it can all be published. So on a daily basis, that's what happens. The third thing is that we have a completely independent judiciary, and that's a really good thing that we have this. So the judiciary, South Africa is not a parliamentary democracy today. South Africa is a constitutional democracy, meaning that the constitution has the final word. The constitution is supreme, and there's a constitutional court in Johannesburg, which I think is on your program that you will visit there. Perhaps finally, just under this point, is to say that there's a spirit in South Africa that's called Ubuntu. Some of you will have heard this term, UBUNTU, which really just means that it says a person is a person because of other people. You are because I am, and I am because you are. That's what the spirit of Ubuntu is about. And South Africans on the whole try to live this spirit of Ubuntu. So even politically, if someone were to ask me about what's happening in South Africa, the fact is that between the two big parties, the ANC and the DA, they have almost 80% of the vote, and I don't foresee much of that changing next year in the election. You'll still have these two major parties getting close to 80% of the vote between them and their allies. And so that's the mass movement of South African voters. They migrate towards those two parties. Our main weaknesses, I would say a few. First of all, we have a very weak public education system. I mean, there's pockets of excellence in terms of education in South Africa, but the major weakness in South Africa would be our public education system, where children, by the time they reach, say, grade 7 or say 12 years old, many of them cannot read for meaning. And so there's a real big literacy and numeracy problem in our public education system. The second biggest issue is corruption. We have, like in most countries, but here it's felt particularly strongly, how many of our systems in society have been corrupted. Fortunately, there's still the free media and there's still the independent judiciary that can counter this. But politicians on the whole are quite corrupt in this country. And then, of course, the issue, I mean, one of the effects of that is that we have an electricity problem. I mean, the lights are on at the moment, but we have what is called load shedding. So something like 4, 6, or 8 hours a day, we might not have electricity here in this country. As people who come to visit here, you won't feel that because certain areas are exempt from that. So hotels and so on, they would all have either generators or they would just be exempt from not having electricity. And so the big challenge would be, how do we create a more inclusive and just economy? So for South Africa to really thrive, how do we create a more inclusive and just economy? It's the biggest. Now that we have political freedom, how do we get economic freedom or economic justice? I think that's the main challenge that we deal with. So, yeah, I think I can say much more, but I think let me stop there. Michael, is that enough for you to chew on? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Edwin, very much. It's difficult in a half an hour to give such a comprehensive overview, but you gave us quite a bit to assimilate and to research. I know Rebecca asked if it was trade unions just in South Africa. I mean, I'll let you read the chat. I'll read the question. You mentioned trade union involvement. Was that South Africa trade unions or worldwide labor unions? What in particular did they do? And then we'll open it up for other questions from other folks. Okay.
Yeah, just to say that it's South African trade unions. Of course, they were working together with the frontline states, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and so on and so forth. The unions there, but actually they're all linked to this thing called the ILO, the International Labour Organizations based in Geneva, and so they would generally work with labor unions across the globe. I remember some friends of mine who were trade unions. They said we'd go to the US and we'll meet with trade unionists there. And they'll come to the airport and they'll meet us in a limo. They couldn't believe the kind of trade unions that you have in your country and how that happens. In our country, it is really sort of the working class unions that operate. So they didn't understand, how unions could be so wealthy. Of course, it's different now. Now trade unions have shares in major companies and so on and so forth. But at that time, it was really organizing from the ground up, with the union members paying a small amount per week or per month to the trade union. And so yeah, and of course they connected globally, and so people across the globe would link with the trade unions in South Africa.
Thank you, Edwin. Anybody else? And we don't have to type them in now. Just well, Todd, go ahead and ask your question, Todd.
There's a question about a newspaper, magazine type journal. Yes, there's the Daily Maverick that you can. It's just dailymaverick.co.za that I would recommend. Most of the articles are not behind a paywall, so you can read articles there almost daily. And then there's a Ground Up groundup.org.za. I think it's groundup.org.za. Again, brilliant articles there about what's happening in South Africa. I mean, there are more, but those would be the two that I would recommend you read.
Todd, do you want to follow up, or is that good?
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Who else has questions for Edwin?
Either I was
Jay,
very
go
clear
ahead.
or I
Go
was
ahead,
very
Jay.
unclear.
Please. Go ahead, Jay.
Sorry?
Oh, Edwin, how are you?
Oh, good. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Who am I speaking to?
It's
Charles.
That's
Hi.
Jay.
Jay who hosted you, and he and Judy
Yes,
hosted
of
you in
course,
their
of
home.
course.
Uh-huh.
Yes, of course.
I'm
Thank you.
curious. This is almost 30 years later, as you said, and I'm curious about who are the privileged in the South African society, and who are the least privileged as 30 years later.
Well, the least privileged would be your young people. We have a youth unemployment rate. I think at the moment it stands at 67% or something. So we have a huge youth unemployment rate right now.
And when you say youth, Edwin, is that 16 to 25, or what does that mean to you when you say youth?
No, we work with the definition of youth as 18 to 35.
Thank you.
18 to 35 years old. I personally work with young people. That's what I do on a daily basis now. In fact, just today, I mean, this morning, we launched a drum making program here, with 13 young people coming to learn how to make drums. By the time you arrive, we will have been going for a few months, and you'll be able to see the end product and also see how they work. So that's very exciting. But anyway, so just to answer your question, so those would be the least of privileged people. And I mean, we often speak about that as a time bomb, because it's impossible that we can have so many young people out of work and not have some sort of major challenge eventually. And so a lot of people are focusing on youth unemployment right now, and to see what we can do about that. And the most privileged would still be those who have, let's call them the old money, all those who were able to benefit through apartheid, who still own farms and businesses and so on and so forth. I mean, we have a very effective stock exchange in Johannesburg, and so those who own most of those companies would all still be sort of the old privileged ones. I mean, there are new people coming through, obviously through the last 30 years. They've been able to co-opt several black people, in a sense, into that strata of the economy. But your majority of people in this country are not there. In fact, we have what's called the highest Gini coefficient rate in this country, in the world, meaning that the gap between rich and poor are the highest. And here where Dion and I live, that this would be one of the places where that is most acute. You have billionaires living here, and you have the very poorest of the poor living in an area like this.
And just so that we heard it again, the youth unemployment rate, 18 to 35, is
67. I'll give you the exact, but it's probably close to 70%.
Yeah. Thank you. Who else? Thank you, Jay, for that question.
I do have a follow-up question.
You look very intense.
I do have a follow-up question, and that is for the youth. Go ahead. Because you just mentioned that you're teaching the youth to make drums, and I'm just curious about your entrepreneurial new startup business ecostructure there, and whether that is going to be one way that you can enable this less fortunate group to gain wealth. I'm just curious about that.
Well, I'm going to put down a website on the chat box. and you can go onto this site and actually see the origins of the program, and then on there there's the drumming program is on there. You'll be able to read much about it. We work with working class young people. In other words, we work with the young people who are unemployed and even unemployable, with the least skills. And so every Thursday, I meet with a group of just over 20 young people, week after week. And first of all, we build their confidence, because when you meet them for the first time, they won't even look at you and talk to you that way. But after 5 or 6 weeks, 8 weeks, they grow in confidence and they are able to start talking to you. And they begin to discover their own agency and so on. So if this project is a really, really big success, yes, of course, then we'll make sure that people do. The plan from our side at the moment is that we must be able to sell as many drums as possible, and they must benefit from the sales of that. And so yes, initially it will give some sort of income to them, so that they can take money home to their parents and say, this is for food or whatever. I mean, that's the initial idea. The idea is not to make anyone super wealthy, unless this project takes on a whole different life of its own. Besides the drumming, of course, I mean, it's a skill that we are teaching people, and we've already been talking to each other about other kind of woodwork and other kind of making furniture and all kinds of other things that we're hoping we'll be able to do as a result of this. But that will take time. The drumming has a bit of a story behind it. We've started drumming to begin with, and we've done some excellent things. I can share some of that with you. And this is really phase 2, is now the actual drum making. Yes, we will be selling, and the plan is to make sure that the young people do have an income of sorts. And if they do get skills and they do get a job as a result of their training with us, that's fine. We will say goodbye to them and wish them well. And then other young people, of course, who are standing in the queue will join us, will be upskilled, and then might also move on or stay with us for a while. So the idea is to, first of all, give them confidence, life skills in that sense, and then secondly, to give them some skills to be able to eke out some sort of existence, but also a life for themselves.
And on Friday, September the 8th, we'll be visiting with the Volmo Youth Leadership Program, yes, according to our itinerary. So you have the website. Todd, why don't you just read your question, please?
Edwin, do you consider South Africa to be mostly a secular or mostly religious society today?
It is mostly a religious society, meaning there are millions of people who are still very committed to faith. And it takes on different forms, of course. The biggest church group in South Africa is called the ZCC, Zion Christian Church, I think it's called, yeah. And those are millions of people. Now, they do not belong to the sort of mainline Anglican Methodist kind of denominations, Catholic. They are an African traditional religion Christian group. But yeah, so if anyone were to ask me what is the biggest Christian group in the country, I would say ZCC. But then you have 4 million Methodists, and you have Anglicans and Catholics and many other evangelical churches. And so by and large, South Africa is a religious society. Pockets of the society have become very secular, and in many ways it's moving towards a more secular society. But at this moment, it is still mostly people of faith. The Muslim community is small. I think no more than 3% of South Africa would be Muslim, but most of them are concentrated in Cape Town. And so when you're in Cape Town, you'll see the sort of Muslim society here, in Cape Town in particular, and then others, Jewish, Hindu, Baha'i, and so on and so forth. Those are smaller groups in South Africa. that exists. But yeah, at least 70% of South Africa are very religious.
And the government, this constitutional system is a secular governmental system.
Yeah, it's a secular constitution respecting all religions. The only reference to God in the constitution is in its preamble, where it says God bless South Africa, and then in different languages. We have 11, well now 12 official languages in South Africa. But of course, the most English and Afrikaans would be the most spoken, and Zulu, those would be the most spoken and used languages, and the others are smaller than that. But most South Africans, I would say, speak at least 3 or 4 languages. And yeah, so it's a very multilingual society. You will hear it in the music, in all the things that hopefully some of you have listened to some of the music. But yeah, it's a very multilingual, but it's a secular, officially a secular society.
So we have time. We have time for one more question, and Chuck Wolf asked it. So, Chuck, I'm going to let you just ask it rather than trying to read it from the chat. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question, and then because we could talk with Edwin for hours, and we want to get to Dion. we want to get to Dion today because Dion has to get to the airport to fly back home. So, Chuck, go ahead and ask your question.
What is the level of tension, if there's any, between those that live in the rural area and those who live in the urban areas?
Good, interesting question. I move very much between the urban and rural areas here in the Western Cape, and I cannot speak of huge tensions here. But I do think in other parts of South Africa there's the sense of the urban people are somehow a little bit more important than the rural people. And of course, rural young people they leave the rural areas and go to the urban areas, and they go and live and work there. But they always go back. I mean, there's a culture, particularly say in the Western Cape, there's a culture here of people who say come from the rural areas in the Eastern Cape. They always travel back there at the end of the year. So there's this mass, almost exodus at the end of the year, and then they all come back in January. That's our summertime. We're now moving towards our winter time now at the moment. So no, not anything, unless Dion, you want to say something else there. But as far as I know, there's not a huge amount of tension at all, but rather kind of a creative tension that happens here.
Edwin, civil rights movement here in the U.S. was 50 to 60 years ago, and yet racial tension still exists, right? It doesn't, just because there was a civil rights movement and some official legal and governmental successes, it doesn't mean that racial strife disappeared. Talk to us just for a minute, very briefly, about post-apartheid South Africa and racial tension.
Yeah, look, obviously there's in terms of racism that continues, and every now and then there's a flare up because someone has said something to someone in society. I mean, most of the time people are attempting to at least be respectful to each other and listen to each other and so on. The tension, I would say, really is because of the economic disparity that exists and the inequality that exists. That's where the main level of tension is. Of course, some of the debates, particularly in the US, sometimes like before, and it happens now as well. So debates around white supremacy and whiteness and so on. But South Africa is a very different society from the US in the sense that we are majority black. You may not even see that sometimes when you go into a restaurant. Sometimes you can say, like, the whole restaurant is white. You kind of have this kind of thing. But it's a different kind of society. There are, of course, racial tensions from time to time, but mostly Black people are comfortable within their own skin, and then we call out racism when we see it. And so when it happens, we call it out, but because it's illegal actually to be racist, it gets dealt with quite quickly. But you can expect a flare up any day almost. It's almost like your gun violence, your mass shootings or something is something like that. And it doesn't happen here as frequently as your mass shootings happen, but certainly you can expect a kind of a comment from time to time coming out, and then for a week or so there's a big uproar about it, and then it dies down, and then it's calm for the next month or so, and then suddenly something happens again. But it is there, but it's not something that dictates our life together at all.
Thank you, Edwin, for that. And just I want to just say thanks for this last 45, 50 minutes, Edwin. This was really enlightening for us all, I think. And I know that we'll have other opportunities to visit with you, not only on the trip, but in our next meeting or meetings. So thank you. Dion, I want to, for those of you who came in late, Dion is in Pittsburgh now with his daughter, son-in-law, and only grandchild. And Dion will be leaving for the airport in just a little bit to fly back to South Africa. So Dion, welcome to the US and goodbye. And also, what would you like to share with us just in terms of the specifics and details of the trip?
So thank you, Michael. Thank you, Edwin. Again, it's good to see Edwin, and I'm looking forward to see him again. It has been a good time here in the US, especially here in Pittsburgh. We did a lot of sightseeing. I learned a lot about the history of Pittsburgh, the steel capital of shall I say, the southeast Pennsylvania area. And we're flying back tonight. All I want to first say, make a comment, is I think all of you have received the memo or the information that Edwin and I have decided, looking at all the different aspects of your accommodation in the Cape, that we will upgrade you to, we already did that, upgrade you to the Commodore Hotel, which is just next door to the Portswood Hotel, and a very, very nice hotel, very close to the waterfront. If I say waterfront, I don't mean the waterfront like the ocean, but a waterfront which we have as something that you have in San Francisco. It is close to the water, but there's a lot of very interesting shops, and makes a good outing in the evening. So, but the other thing is also that the Commodore have larger rooms, and also can accommodate the request for king size beds. So that has been dealt with. I think further on, Michael, I will take questions. If any of you have specific questions that you want to ask about the operational stuff and the logistics of your trip to South Africa.
Thank you, Dion. We'll entertain some questions from you for Dion now about the nuts and bolts of the itinerary of the trip itself.
This is Joy.
Hi, Joy.
I think a lot of people are arriving 2 days early. I'm arriving just 1 day early. Will I need to make my own way from the airport to the hotel? Does the hotel have a shuttle bus?
Yeah, I think it's important questions. Thank you, Joy. First of all, it's important for us to have your itineraries, all of them, as soon as possible, as when you get it available. And I'm under the impression, Michael, that you will gather all the information and then send it to us.
Mm-hmm.
We work with a shuttle service and somebody that will meet and greet you. And that is $30 per trip. So if you send us your itinerary, your flight itinerary, date of arrival, the two things that we have to keep in mind is we have to book you a hotel room for that night, and also get you from the airport to the hotel and then back again. That's very important logistical questions or information. So if we can get it as soon as possible, it would be wonderful.
Dion, you have the, what you do have is how many nights in advance each person will
That's
need.
correct.
What you don't have is the flight information. And I have that, I think, for everyone, and I'll get that to you before the end of the month.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Joy, good question. Thanks. Good to see you. Who else? Patty. Patty, you're muted.
Okay, I have one question. I have two questions. One is regarding the domestic flight. One of the persons who is with me right now here, we are flying into Cape Town, and then we're sometime during the trip, we're taking the domestic flight to Johannesburg. And we will not be flying back because we will ultimately be flying home from Johannesburg. Now, we are wondering, what are the weight and suitcase size limitations for that domestic flight? Because we will have to limit our entire packing to whatever that is.
Patty, yeah, that's a good question. That's been asked a couple times. I'll let Dion answer now. I've answered that question a couple times in emails and email responses, but I'm going to let Dion answer now since you're there. So go ahead, Dion, please.
On your international flights, it's customary for people from the United States, even if they fly via European countries, to have 2 suitcases. And South Africa work with kilograms. That is 23 kilograms per suitcase, which is about 50 pounds. So flying into Cape Town, you won't have a problem when it comes to if you stick to the mass or the weight of your luggage and the 2 baggage or 2 suitcases. The one problem and the concern is when you fly back. Now there we would make an arrangement that if you have an extra bag, it will be paid separate. And we will stand in for that separate payment. It has been already budgeted for, which basically mean you will get to we will all get to the airport, make sure we are there an hour early, and then you weigh in your luggage, and we will pay for your second what do you call it, suitcase, when it goes up to Johannesburg.
It's 3 o'clock.
Mike, I'm not sure if we, in the previous email, indicate that everybody should pay their own, but we can, in the budget, work in the payment for the extra suitcase.
So let me just repeat to you what you just said, and tell me if I understood correctly. So we can bring a suitcase or 2 with us to South Africa, however we pack, up to 23 kilograms, 50 pounds per bag. And then if we do have an extra bag between Cape Town and Johannesburg, then the travel agency will pick up the cost for that extra bag.
That's correct.
So we don't have to limit what we would normally bring so that we can get everything on that domestic flight across the country. That won't be a problem. That's good to know. Thank you.
Just
My other question, can I have one more?
Oh, please, Patty. Yeah, and that was a good clarifying question to ask. I'm glad that you asked it. Thanks.
Okay. My other question is, I'm trying.
To add something?
Wait 1 second. Go ahead, Edwin, and then Patty, ask your question. Edwin, go ahead.
No, I just noticed that Dion might want to add something. Dion?
Yeah, I just want to say that you must be careful how you about the weight of your suitcase, that it's not more than 23 kilograms. Then it's in a whole new ball game. So rather stick it into 2 suitcases, and then we will pay for it, and it will make it easier. Don't try to bring a suitcase of 30 kilograms, then we have problems.
Thank you, Dion. That's really important. Go ahead, Patty.
My other question is, I'm trying to anticipate what the most extreme weather situation is that we might encounter so that I'll be prepared for it. And I'm wondering, it's my understanding we are going out on a whaling ship. So I'm anticipating that, is it going to be pretty chilly out there, colder than it would be on land? I'm guessing maybe windy, damp,
Yes.
maybe rainy and cold. Are those things all likely to be true?
Edwin can answer the boat one, and then I'll speak about your clothes in general.
Okay.
Yeah, the first thing, of course, is that this is all weather permitting. If the sea is too rough or it's raining too much, but then we won't go. Of course, that's just one reality. But assuming it's a beautiful day, and I think you'll have most of the time you'll have beautiful days here. A jacket. I mean, when you go out onto the sea, it gets both windy and cold.
Mm-hmm.
The deeper you go, so you do need at least a very warm, puffy jacket on the sea, with 1 or 2 light clothing pieces under it. That will be warm enough. Of course, you can always take off if it gets too warm, but rather take something with. We don't, just while I'm talking now, we don't have what you often have, air conditioning and so on in the houses. So you might even find the houses quite cold or cooler than what you're used to. So remember to always, at least, we talk about layered clothing, put on various layers and you can always take it off.
Thank you.
Yeah, when we look at the weather that time of the year, it will be September, like August, beginning of September, which is usually our turn of the seasons and going into spring. But for the past 10 years or so, there wasn't really spring day on the 1st of September. So like with climate change, can still be cold. So as Edward said, I think I would recommend, layered clothing. With a nice jacket or something warm that will comfort you. There are 3 other, or there are basically 3 extreme weather situations that you have to deal with. The one is definitely when you go on top of Table Mountain. It can, remember, that's close to 3,560 feet up in the air, which is very cold. So then you have to bring some warm clothes. Depending on the day, it may be a very sunny and mild day, but the weather on top of Table Mountain can change very fast.
That's the first day. That's early on in the trip. Yeah.
That's right, yeah. The second one will be when we go to Robben Island on the boat. You spend 45 minutes on the boat, and on the boat and on the island. But the boat has a cabin, and you have to sit down all the time within the big, large cabin. So I find it not too cold to sit there, but it can be windy and cold on the island. And the other one is what Edwin was talking about. But mainly bring something for the evening, and depending on your own temperature, your own body temperature, some people are more warm-blooded or warm inclined, others are more cold inclined. You know yourself. But the layer option, I think, is the best.
Patty, thank you for that question.
And
Who
I
else?
thank both of you.
Yeah, Ron, please.
My understanding is, but I think I've heard people ask this, so my understanding was that we don't need any specific additional vaccinations. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. I found out, normally they would recommend that you do a few basic shots. The CDC has some basic shots that they recommend. For instance, something like yellow fever. But I spoke to my own medical doctor about that, and he says it is basically not necessary to do that if your immune system is, in such a way that it's not very compatible with that sort of vaccination. And he says that we are not in an area where there's that yellow fever, so we can't say 100% no, but 9%, yeah, that's not necessary.
Yeah, it really is not necessary, but if you feel you need to take it, you know. But someone like myself and Dion and others, we will not be taking any vaccinations. We'll just be going up north, and it really is no problem.
It's been a while for me, but I did a few mission trips to Haiti, Kenya, India, and so forth. And so I can't even remember what I've done, but I do know for us in Fort Wayne, maybe I should check on that. Even though I've been retired a while, the infectious disease doctors, and there's a couple of different groups of them. I think you used to be able to call their office, and they would let you tell them where you're going, and they would let you know what they recommended based on. I think they did based it on the CDC. So maybe I can look into that further, but I'll take it. I'm glad your answer is great. I assumed that we didn't have to do anything more.
Thank you, Dion. Thank you, Ron. Who else? Yeah, Patty, please.
I have one more question. I just was reading in news articles that there is a lot of cholera in the countries to the north of South Africa, and especially on the east side. And I'm wondering if that is making a presence in South Africa.
Well, what I can say is, as far as I follow the news, we don't have those in South Africa. If it will appear, it will be in the rural areas where there's a lot of water and rain. We won't go into that areas. So in Cape Town and the areas that will be going, I can't foresee that will be a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Patty. Who else?
Yeah.
Yeah, Vicky. Vicky, you're muted still.
Yep,
there you go.
There we go. Just got it. As we head into the second part of the trip in Johannesburg area and out into the bush area for the safari style tourism, I'm assuming that is also going to be the dress for layering and so forth, and no heat in the buildings, more than likely.
Maybe just to say that the hotels, I think, are generally heated. Dion, am I right? We do have in the hotels, yeah. But in the house, like when you come to Volmouth here, you won't have that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you will have aircon in your rooms, even in the game park, that warm and cold. At that time of the year in the game park, it's very nice. But you are right. I it slipped my mind that during your morning game drives, they usually leave before 6 o'clock, and that can be very, very cold. They usually supply blankets, but I mean it's better for you to have your own clothing on.
Okay.
Good.
So it sounds like some woolly clothing, socks, and maybe a stocking cap if you need it is a good thing to bring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vicky. Who else? Well, we'll have, I'm sure we'll have other questions arise as time progresses. Everybody, thank you. And Dion, thank you. Just a reminder that the second payment is due June the 1st. Dion, when you get back in a couple days, I'll just double check with you. Since you've been in the States, I'll double check with you about getting you the wiring you that first payment again, just so that you have it. And then we'll wire you the second payment right away after the 1st of June. So that'll be taken care of. Janet Stevenson, you and I have been, in fact, it was your idea, and you were in touch with me with a website. I ran it by Edwin, and he just mentioned Biko today as another film. Talk to us about your idea and just where we're going with it from here.
No, thank you.
And thank you, Janet, for the idea. It was a wonderful idea.
Well,
Mm.
and I want to thank, Edwin and Dion for this time together. Really appreciate it as we prepare. And that kind of is the segue to, how can we best prepare? Michael gave us a reading list, and I'm sure he worked with Edwin on this, and perhaps you too, Dion. And that's awesome. Also thinking, in addition to the written word, looking at film, documentary, and the potential for us to gather, to build not only our knowledge about this country and people, but also maybe build community among ourselves as co-travelers. So Todd and I would like to invite y'all over to watch a movie together, and talking with, getting suggestions from Edwin. I think the film that floated to the top was Invictus.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Brilliant.
yeah, I have not seen that. And I know that was pretty popular
Yeah.
at the time. That would have been like 2009, I believe it was out. It's a Clint Eastwood film with Matt Damon.
Yeah.
And Morgan Freeman. It had some people in it. So, and it's biographical. I mean, I didn't look based on true events. So, then you get into dates, and not everyone will be able to attend, but we were thinking maybe having 2 to 3 films that we would show over the summer. And the first date that we're able to host is June 5th. And
Monday.
again, that's a Monday. We were thinking, just come on over. We'll have a light supper for us, like around 5. Watch the film.
6.
Yeah, Todd's saying 6. Details will follow, but something where you would be able, it'll be at that hour, but you'll get home before the sun goes down. Okay. I don't know if that sounds good. And I realize if you've seen the film, great. You're still welcome to come. We're not reviewing the film for any other basis. It's not like we're giving a critique. And it's more or less just to kind of get to be together.
Well, I really appreciate this, Janet, and I want to just reemphasize your point that, I mean, we could all sit in our respective, homes and watch the movie, but this is really about building kind of a group cohesiveness, building community, getting to know each other. And I just think it's a brilliant idea, and I really appreciate you raising it for us, and you and Todd offering your home. And we'll get you how we like our fillets, whether it's or rare, or how we like that. So anyway, Janet, thank you for that. And Todd, thank you very much. And they'll send me the information, and I'll get it out to the whole group, and with the address and time and the details, and we'll go from there. But it sounds like we're going to watch Invictus, at least on movie night 1.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
All right. Good. Gang, it's just really good to be with you on screen here. It's just wonderful to be with you. And I want to just once again thank Dion and thank Edwin for taking their time, and their expertise, their insight, and just their just goodwill to spend time with us. We're really excited, Edwin, to be spending time with you, and Dion. All the details that you've taken care of for us already, we appreciate. Anything else that needs to be said before we say farewell for now?
Go
ahead, Ron, please.
I'm sorry. I had mentioned to Michael, or maybe Edwin too, about, I think I was hoping that we could visit with Dr. Busak. And then the other thing I mentioned to Michael, because he is so good on his trips about bringing art and culture into the trips. I was thinking of Paul Simon's Graceland, and just African music, South African music,
and dancing.
Well, yeah, Jane said dancing. you know, if we could be, maybe that would even work for some of us the day or two before, if we get there, you know, on that Saturday or something. I don't know. I just wondered if there's anything in Cape Town that I'm sure there is, that we could do.
As the time gets closer, that was an excellent idea. And in fact, you were one of about 4 people who, John Gardner, I know, who's not on the call. He sent me a question about that, about various cultural kinds of things, or even sporting things that some individuals could do in the days prior, or maybe to work in during the trip. And I also asked Edwin about Alan Bosak, and he said, well, if he's available, he would try to work him in as well to meet our group. So Edwin, you want to respond to Ron's larger question, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, you know, of course, we as we get closer to the time, I will ask Alan, Dr. Bosak already now, but I know that his program can be quite unpredictable. So I will do my best, certainly, to make sure that he joins us at one of the events, or otherwise we'll find a way to connect with him, Ron. So I can't say that 100% it will happen, but I can say, I can be very, I can definitely say that we will do our best to bring him, and he normally responds very positively to when we do ask him to come and join certain groups. So on the whole, I'm sure he will join us. It might be at the at the Tutu Foundation, at the exhibition there, or otherwise it might be at another event that we invite him to come and have a dinner with us or something. And his wife is not well. He often does not want to leave her alone. So that's just one little consideration we must just keep in our minds. As regards to the dancing or the music, whatever, of course, Cape Town is the jazz capital of Africa. There are many different options here. And I think, Michael, I think I sent you some of Artscape or Bax the Theatre, or all these various places in Cape Town. So if you come a few days ahead of time, you can certainly schedule something. But I will keep my eyes open for particular things. Please be nice to us when you come. It is the Rugby World Cup at that time. And the Springboks are going to be playing. We are the Rugby World Champions, and so we need to keep our eyes on that as well. So we'll invite you to come and join some of the rugby, watch some of the rugby with us while you are traveling here.
Good. Patty, you had a question.
Just how many people are signed up for the trip?
25.
Thank you.
Janie and I are used to going out clubbing till 2 or 3 in the morning. So if you could,
okay, I'll show you the best spots.
Okay.
Sure. Anybody else? Janet, you have a lovely granddaughter there. It's good. Thanks for welcoming her. And what's her name?
This is Holly.
Hi, Holly.
Hey,
Nice to welcome you to our call. All righty, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We're excited to be traveling together. I'm kind of bifurcated here. I've been in touch with people in Bethlehem and Jerusalem already this morning, and so I'm kind of doing doing split work here I'm leaving in a month from today, as a matter of fact. So anyway, Edwin and Dion, thanks so much. And all of you, thank you too. And if not before, we'll see you on June the 5th at either 5 or 6 at the Stevensons for Invictus. All righty, everybody. Peace.